Everyone's doing everyone's doing well. Okay. So in my first talk on the Heart Sutra, I basically provided the historical context and the textual context within Mahayana Buddhism in order to appreciate the Heart Sutra. But there are many ways to appreciate the Heart Sutra. And for the rest of the talks in this series, I'll focus on the practical application of the Heart Sutra. So we'll be talking about methods of practice. Okay? Yeah. All right. So tonight I'd like to talk about Avalokitesvara. And that's the first line of the Heart Sutra. When Avalokitesvara was coursing in the deep prajna paramita. That's the first line. So tonight we'll explore the significance and the methods of Avalokitesvara. Actually translate to perceiver of the sounds of the world. 观世音. This is an interpretive translation. It's not really the literal translation. And who translated like this? Mainly Kumarajiva, 4th century great translator of texts from Sanskrit into Chinese. And that interpretive translation comes from Mahayana Sutras. Particularly, I'm assuming, the Lotus Sutra. Avalokitesvara is featured in several Mahayana texts. Of course, the Heart Sutra, also the Lotus Sutra, also the Surangama Sutra. But there are minor texts that also refer to Avalokitesvara. And this interpretation has to do with this particular Bodhisattva's process of awakening. This particular Bodhisattva's method of practice. Perceiving the sounds of the world. But the text that we're using doesn't really bring out the nuance of Avalokitesvara. The text that we're using is 8th century translation by Xuanzang, the Tripitaka master, one of the greatest translators from China, spent something like 15, 16 years in India and Central Asia learning the language. So he mastered both languages, also South Asia he went to. When he came back to China, he brought numerous texts and he translated many. And his translation is the one that is consistently used in the East Asian tradition for this text. Kumarajiva's translation, very eloquent. He was imperially sponsored with other translators, scribes, editors, that's able to polish the text. So the Chinese is very eloquent. Xuanzang, however, also imperially sponsored, but he favored a more literal translation. And the way he translated, very skillfully has a double meaning. The way he translated Avalokitesvara is 观自在. 观 means perceiver or observer or contemplator of all that exists, which is closer to Ishvara. But the term that he used has the same valence of meaning as self at ease. In the indigenous Chinese religious context, pre-Buddhist context, 自在 means self at ease. And it traces back to the indigenous Chinese notion of freedom. Who is it who's the one who's at ease? Right? So on one valence, one layer, it draws from the indigenous Chinese notion of self, all that exists, at ease. Another valence is simply freedom. So, perceiver of freedom, of liberation. See, the beauty of this translation encapsulates the whole Heart Sutra. Bodhisattva perceiver of freedom. That would be a more literal translation, but that freedom encompasses the meaning of Ishvara as well, which is all that exists. All that exists is already free. Everything that exists, already free. Can you appreciate that? Yeah. If you cannot, it's okay. I'll unpack the meaning. Now the question is, how did Avalokitesvara perceive the freedom that exists in all things? How did he accomplish that? Avalokitesvara is not a historical person, unlike Siddhartha Gautama, Shakyamuni Buddha. He's a figure introduced in Mahayana scriptures by the Buddha. And there's not one origin story of Avalokitesvara. Different texts have different narratives about this particular bodhisattva. For example, in the Lotus Sutra, Avalokitesvara studied with, this is chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, which dedicates to Avalokitesvara. It's called the chapter on the universal gate, universal Dharma door, Pumenping. And in this text, it introduces, Shakyamuni Buddha introduces Avalokitesvara as one who studied with an ancient Buddha, Gu Fo, whose name is Avalokitesvara. That particular Buddha from long ago attained Buddhahood from contemplating liberation, contemplating freedom, contemplating the sounds of the world, and taught one of his disciples that method, and that disciple became Avalokitesvara. It's like the same name, right? You could say this is a mark of Dharma seal. You know how the stamp seals work? Sanctifies, legitimizes, and also it's the same replica of the image of freedom. So the teacher and the disciple, the minds meet. They both are Avalokitesvara. What is the method by which Avalokitesvara reached liberation? Contemplating, perceiving the sounds of the world. The sutra that elaborates on this is Surangama Sutra. Surangama Sutra, in which the Buddha asks all the bodhisattvas and the arhats present, all those who have reached liberation, to share their experience and the path through which they realized awakening. So 25 of them shared to the whole assembly, and Avalokitesvara was one of them. And this method I'd like to talk about tonight. But this is merely kind of one method associated with Avalokitesvara, Guan Yin in Chinese, or Guan Zizai, observer of freedom. This is the most difficult one, difficult method. The most difficult method is contemplating the ear faculty, the nature of the ear faculty, contemplation of sounds. The second method, not so easy, but totally doable, is the one introduced in the Heart Sutra. Contemplation of the 5 skandhas from the Mahayana perspective, not from early teachings. And I'll reserve that till later when we get to the phrase 5 skandhas are empty. Right? There's also a double meaning there. 5 skandhas are empty. 5 skandhas, of course, are what constitutes human beings, what each and every one of us are made up of. Right? And the Western Cartesian notion of what a human being is, body and mind, right? Kind of twofold. From the Buddhist perspective, 5-fold. Form, it's a kind of a process-oriented way of explaining what constitutes a human being. And by that I mean form, the body, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. So these 4 are sequential, instant by instant, what constitutes the experience of existence. We'll talk about that maybe next talk. So that's the second method. But over the centuries, they've developed other methods. Avalokitesvara, or Guan Yin, in early Mahayana text, was male. Sometime during the 5 dynasties, which is 907 to 960 CE, 10th century. Avalokitesvara, in iconographic depictions, start to take on kind of female form. And that has to do a lot with the circulation of some miracle tales connected to Avalokitesvara. Right? One particular was the story of Miao Shan. I won't get into the story. Footnote. Miao Shan was a third daughter of this high local ruler, regional ruler, and since birth has proclivity to practice Buddhism, wanted to becoming a nun. The father was furious, prevented her, and she ran away anyway, and it got really bad, and the father kind of out of wrathful fury burned down the monastery where she became a nun. And she wanted to practice celibacy, chastity, and becoming a nun. And so she purportedly passed away. But because of her great vow, she went through the realms of purgatory, and all the kind of demigods supported her, brought her back to life. And she entered the mountains and engaged in ascetic practice and became awakened. Decades later, her father, maybe out of karmic retribution, experienced a mysterious illness. No doctors can cure. I know I wasn't supposed to talk about this, but the story is so... All of us like to hear stories, you know. Let's go over the story. So, Miao Shan manifested as an ascetic monk to the counselor who was seeking out different medical advice locally in that region. He says, the only person that can cure your king, your local ruler, is to obtain the eyes of one who has never given rise to hatred and anger. How many of you have never given rise to hatred and anger? Okay. So, and there's only one practitioner that he knew of who can fulfill this prerequisite. That's pointed to the location of Miao Shan in the mountains. And that ascetic monk was Miao Shan. She wanted to help her father. So it goes over there, pluck out the eyes to give it to the emissary. This, of course, entails a whole Chinese indigenous tradition of filial piety, filial devotion, self-inflicted violent practices, asceticism. And the father was miraculously healed. And when the father brought his retinue to thank this ascetic, he recognized her, his daughter without eyes, broke down in tears, and converted to Buddhism, to their local kingdom. Good story, right? Kind of soften the discourse on the Heart Sutra a little bit. So this miracle tale circulated pre-10th century, and soon after that, Avalokitesvara became identified with Miao Shan and started to take on female form. So if you see iconography of Japan, for example, Buddhism went to Japan in the 6th, 7th century, Mahayana Buddhism and so on. So their depiction of Avalokitesvara pre-10th century have a little mustache. Right? It's male. But post-10th century start to have female form. Right? And this particular transformation, you can say gender transformation, continued to evolve and perhaps completed during the 16th century, Ming Dynasty. By that time, all depiction of Avalokitesvara or Bodhisattva, perceiver of freedom, takes on the female form. This relates to other methods. That's why I got into the story. Prior to the Ming Dynasty, 16th century, there evolved several methods connected to Avalokitesvara. Right? So we have Surangama Sutra, we have Heart Sutra, right? It's all pre-10th century, early on. Because the Heart Sutra has Gate, Palagate, Palasamgate, Bodhisvaha at the end, the Dharani at the end, the mantra at the end. I'm dating it. And also because of the translator of Xuanzang can date it to probably 8th century. But the appearance of Dharani in Mahayana texts appeared centuries earlier, maybe 3rd century onward. And then, of course, there's the Lotus Sutra. The method connected to Avalokitesvara in chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra is simply recollection, recitation, incantation of Avalokitesvara's name. Right? Which in Chinese, translated by Kumarajiva in the 4th century, is homage, Namo, which means homage, to the Bodhisattva perceiver of all the sounds of the world, Guanxin Pusa. So in Chinese would be Namo Guanxin Pusa, or just Guanyin Pusa. So the person will recite this. That's the method connected. Namo Guanxin Pusa, 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 Namo Guanxin, or Namo Guanyin Pusa, Namo Guanyin Pusa, Namo Guanyin Pusa, or simpler form, 4-character. Guanyin Pusa, Guanyin Pusa, Guanyin Pusa, Guanyin Pusa. So, a method like that. So that would be the 3rd method. But post-10th century, after the story, the gender transformation, we have something called the white-robed Kuan Yin Dharani. Also, no scholars has dated this, but in Japan, there is this practice of 10 verse sutra of Guanyin Bodhisattva advocating the prolonging of life. It's a very short text. I printed it out. The text goes, Guan Shi Yin, right, which is Bodhisattva, perceiver of the sounds of the world. Pay homage to Guan Shi Yin, homage to the Buddha, forged a causal condition with the Buddha, karmic affinity with the Buddha, karmic affinity with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, thus attaining permanence, ease, selfhood, and purity. Come from the Parinirvana Sutra, this line. In the morning, recollect Avalokitesvara. In the evening, recollect Avalokitesvara. Thought after thought arise from the mind. Thought after thought inseparable from the mind. In Chinese, it sounds better because everything rhymes. So there's a built-in mnemonic device in the phraseology that help memorization. This particular method, coupled with the white road Guanyin Dharani, we don't have clear history of where they come from, but probably come from miracle tales. Because the white robe Dharani, it is said, is a vision from a dream to this layperson, and he wrote it down and widely advocated this and became very popular. Right? Same thing with this one. So either is invented in Japan and is associated particularly with Japanese Zen monasteries. So when my teacher was there in the 70s, he brought it back because there weren't any circulation of this text in Taiwan or China that he can think of. So he kind of brought it back. And he found it in, this is what was chanted in Zen monasteries. Right? So my suspicion is probably late Ming Dynasty. Right? So there's Surangama Sutra, contemplation of sound. There's Heart Sutra, contemplation of 5 skandhas. There's a Lotus Sutra, recitation of Avalokitesvara's name. There's a white robe, Guanyin Dharani, spell. There's a 10-character or a 10-phrase sutra for prolonging life and shelter and safety. This one. And there is in the West, because of the popularity of Tibetan Buddhism, of the 6-syllable heart mantra of Avalokitesvara, the Om Mani Padme Hum, which in translation is jewel, wish fulfilling jewel in the lotus. And Padme, money jewel in Mahayana Sutra refers to the wish fulfilling jewel. Right? You could say it symbolizes method. I don't know how the Tibetans would interpret that. Right? The money would symbolize, my interpretation, the method. And Padme means lotus. Lotus in Buddhism symbolizes emptiness, shunyata, or wisdom. So it's a union of method and wisdom. Is that how they interpret it? Yeah. Why is the lotus symbolize shunyata? Because have you seen a lotus? A lotus stems from mud, and its core is hollow. There's nothing there. It's a hollow core. So that kind of symbolizes how the Mahayana Sutra use that metaphor. The emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. Which is covered by the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. So tonight, with the remaining time, out of all these methods, because we're talking about the Heart Sutra, we'll focus on the 5 skandhas. Why the 5 skandhas? 5 aggregates, constituents of what makes up a human being is empty. That's the main method, which I'll talk about next time. But I really want to talk about contemplation of sound, because this is particularly useful. It's very difficult to use, but there's an easier way to use this method. Would that be all right? Okay. Why do I want to introduce this? Because most of our vexations, emotional afflictions, come from sounds. Another portion come from sight. So sight and sound, filtered by our own internal baggage, habit tendencies, bring up a lot of our vexations. Right? Sounds refers to praise and blame. Harsh words, gossip, misunderstandings, skewed, partial things that you hear. What else? Actually, everything. You can get angry with the sound of a car, right? Some people think, I love nature, nature. If you stay in nature all the time, you probably get annoyed at the birds. Sounds. So it's important for practitioners to have a way to turn and transform the opportunities of sounds into the path of practice, because that constitutes so much of our experience. Does that make sense? So this method is very important. Surangama Sutra speak about this method as consisting of different layers. So Avalokitesvara stands up in the assembly, talk about how he reached awakening through this method. First, to streamline the different stages. First, he focused on the sounds of the environment. And the location where he practiced was at the cliff next to the ocean. So therefore, we have iconographic depiction of Avalokitesvara sitting like this, and water in this sculpture or painting, water. That's the location where he contemplated. So, sound of the environment. This sound is consistent. The waves of the water is consistent. So it makes it easier to practice. So in our practice, at the beginning stage, we have to choose a sound that's consistent. We can't choose a sound that sometimes is there, sometimes not there. If it's not there, where's your method? Your method has to be consistent. Right? Second, consistent, always present, and also relatively steady. Relatively steady. Think of the sound of the stream, sound of the ocean, right? The waves, the waves. So the first stage is contemplating the sounds of the environment. And at this stage, the key is, of course, you have to relax, you gotta ground, and you have to be like a sound absorbing board. Don't selectively, through your discrimination, choose one sound over the other. Instead, allow the sound to come to you. This is the key shift in our habit way of listening. Our habit way of listening is we selectively listen, and our heart, our mind goes out. If you observe your experience of sound, soon as the mind identifies a sound, it's drawn to it. It goes out. And it grasps onto that sound at the expense of other sound. So the contemplation is sound in the environment, non-discriminatingly allow sound to be simply present. Here. Here. So you're like a board. So what does the sound observing board do? Absorbs sounds. Right? Does it matter what sound comes in? So I don't like this one. I like that one better. No. It absorbs sound. Only by absorbing sound, this way, our mind is not reaching out to grasp. Instead, our mind is grounded in the present, allowing sound to be present here. There's a shift in orientation that's very important. So when we do this, the phrase in the sutra, in the Surangama Sutra says, 入流往所, entering the streams, entering the stream, bracket, the sound, the object ceases. What ceases? Sound. It seems like this is sound disappears. So experientially, when you practice this, contemplating the sound, allowing the sound to be present. How many of you have experienced this? I know meditators definitely have, but sometimes this can happen in nature too. Ordinary people, in which you're hearing the sound, you're in nature, and somehow the sound is present. It's almost like the sound is flowing through oneself. Non-discriminately, it's flowing through like palpable. How many of you have experienced this before? Yeah. Can I have this? Thank you. Listen to this, okay? Relax. And ground. And feel the presence to earth. Okay? And you hear this sound. just the sound. The sound is not out there, it's in here. So hearing the sound, being grounded, allow the sound to be present, to flow through oneself. What happens if we continually contemplate the sound? Like this. There would only be the presence of sound, especially if it's consistent, like I said, steady, different waves, or sitting next to a stream, or drops of rain. Right? What happens is there's only sound. There's no separation of you listening to sound. There's only the sound. What sound? This continual stream. So entering the stream, object disappears. It's a stage after that. First, there's just a sound. When the object of sound disappears, that's the beginning of this contemplation. What exists? Silence. The very reason why we hear the differentiation between sound and silence is because of discrimination. It is because of our discrimination, grasping, that there's a distinction between sound and silence. If John Cage were here, he would know exactly what I'm talking about. Why wouldn't silence be a sound? So using a steady sound to draw in the concentration until there's no listener. There's just a sound present. That's the beginning stage of unification of practitioner and the method, or mind and the method become one. So there's just a method present. Just a method. It's like when you being aware of the breath, for that brief moment, there's just the breath. There's no body, there's no head, there's no experience of the breath. It's just the breath. Just the method present. That is a sign of unification, oneness, of awareness and the method. Right? Body disappears. A stage beyond that is, once we're drawn into this, once the discriminating mind, the fluctuating discriminating mind simplifies, then there's no more sound. What's present, sound and silence become one. And that silence becomes present. There's just the ability to hear. There's a shift from sound to the listening, the continuation, the continuum of awareness, of perception. So the object disappears. Right? I'm going to talk about, I know it sounds extremely difficult, it sounds like. I'm going to talk about a difficult way, and I'm going to talk about how to practice it in daily life. Okay? That is the meaning of 入流王所. Entering the stream, the object ceases. Is that awakening? No. It's just oneness. What is this silence? What is this experience? Is there objects? Actually, there is. Object is still there. In the beginning stage of that stage, object is still there. What object? When one enters into oneness, samadhi, it's not a particular sound, but it's almost like the frequency of energy. It's not the sound produced by objects in the world, but it's the frequency of the universe. There's a frequency, energy, presence of the universe. And one perceives that. I'm not talking about when you're very quiet. Maybe some people have experienced this. You can hear your heartbeat. You know, if you listen even closely, maybe you may experience even the blood flowing. Right? Don't focus on that. Because wherever your mind focuses on, your energy will coagulate there. And that will give rise to side effects. Especially if you listen to your heartbeat, it will have some kind of effect because your energy starts to coagulate there. Right? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the most subtle frequency of the universe. That stillness, energy. In that experiencing, there's still an object. Some people call it the ground of being. Right? You can call it kind of consciousness or something like that. Still attachment there. There's a self there still. The self is the oneness experience. Therefore, the next line of the Surangama Sutra says, 反闻闻自性, reverting and listening to the self-nature, to, you could say, to its self-nature of this silence. Or your ability to listen itself. That presence of awareness. Like you look at me, right? There's a visual awareness. Right? What is that? Me, the object ceases, but that perception is there. What is that? Right? So same thing when you hear a sound. And there's some sound. As the sound ceases, what is the self-nature of that? At that point, there's no more sound. There's no more silence. There's no more universal sound. Self-nature, contemplation of self-nature. And what is that self-nature? Prajna. Wisdom, transcendent wisdom. Right? Which we'll talk about next time. These are the stages of practice. How is it applicable to us? Very useful. Very useful. We train ourselves to be like a sounding board. Sounding board. Not discriminating, not giving rise to vexations, emotional afflictions. Don't fall prey to the habit tendencies when we are interacting with people. We practice at the minimum level, deep listening. We listen without agenda, without preference. We listen to the sounds. Not oblivious. It's not demolishing. Guo Gu says the object must disappear. No, don't go that stage yet. You got to go through the actual processes. Not oblivious to sounds. Like the person is talking to you like la 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 la. Not like that, right? You're actually listening. If you listen deeply, without agenda, then you have to, in this process, relax, ground yourself. Sound coming from here. In order to practice deep listening, to listen to the heart of the person. Where is the sound coming from? Where are these words coming from? The feeling tone of that person. You'll be able to hear. You believe it? Yeah. I'm this, I'm doing that, doing this. You hear angst, maybe. Fear. Right? Without agenda, you provide support. It's the first type of listening. So please practice this until the next first Monday. Right? Relax, ground, open. Listen. Listen. Like a sounding board. Practice of deep listening. So instead of, and sometimes, so practice with things that are maybe favorable. Person is just sharing their heart, innocuous, friendly connection. Yeah. And then move on to blame. Criticism. Just listen. Don't go there right away. Right? Because our habit tendency will just coagulate, congeal. Right? Listen to someone that you enjoy listening to. Right? Some music or someone talking. And then just listen to the heart. You have no agenda. Right? And then move on to, like, even people arguing. Maybe if no one's confronting you or anything, just people arguing. Without agenda. Listen to the heart. So you become completely engaged, yet unaffected. That will put a cap on vexations, emotional afflictions, reactivity. It's one of the main sources, like I said, of our day-to-day source of vexations, right? So you have to practice this. If you don't take that as an opportunity to practice, what else do you plan to practice? Sitting like a block of wood on a cushion, and as soon as you get off, everything's back to normal vexation. That's useless. Useless. Right? It's like playing tennis. Oh, I'm very good player. My opponent is the wall. I can only play against the wall. Very good. Backstroke, front stroke. Real people playing tennis? I don't. That's not how I play. Okay? I play against the wall. That's useless. Right? So learn to relax, to ground, and open. Right? Favorable sounds, voices, and perhaps not so favorable. And then you'll discover favorable and not favorable are constructs. They're constructs to whether something is agreeable to you or not. To you or not. Right? How many of you have children or interact with kids? Right? You have children, you interact with kids. How many of you, if you see kids going crazy, doing stuff like that, you become like anxious? Right? Right? Where's that anxious coming from? Most people say, well, the kid. He's the culprit. He makes me mad. Right? Actually, it's yours. It's yours. You have to own up to it. You have to own up to it. Right? And the kids say something, because obviously someone else will not have the same response. If the culprit is really outside you, you should have the same response, no matter who it is. It's yours. Same thing. Your construct. First you start with favorable sounds, and then move on to difficult sounds, and then you move on to, you have some insight about what's favorable, what's unfavorable, what's pleasant, what's not pleasant. What are these constructs? You raising a hand? No. Okay. Okay, stretching. Learning in the midst of activity, of daily life. This becomes extremely useful, very useful. You become not only a good listener, you become connected to those around you. When you're present, you're completely present. Right? The prerequisite of being present is absence. You're absent of your agenda. You're completely present. Just like the difficult stages of practicing this. This disappears. It's just sound. It's just sound. Sound flowing through you like the gong. It's just present. There's no me. There's no self-consciousness. Self-consciousness. You know, little devil standing on your shoulder, and a little angel. Hey, this person's a jerk. What are you listening to? Listen, this person is helping you. You know, blah, 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 blah. Nothing. Absence. In absence, then there's presence. You know, that's part of the practice. Right? And then your response will be, your response is coming out of that. Coming out of that. So there are many different benefits to this. Would you like to try? Yeah, in daily life? Let's try it for a month. If you remember. You know, tie a little string to remember. There's always something to listen to. What do? First, relax. Right? Relax. And then feeling grounded. Sounding board. Sound come here. Don't go. I'll select. Just be present. Absent, conversely, everything's present. All that exists. Which means Ishvara. Avalokitesvara. Avalokita, Ishvara. What's present? Right? All that exists. 在. 自在. Self at ease or self-present. 观自在. Chinese. Xuanzang translate Avalokitesvara's name. Present. Start with something easy, move on to difficult, and then contemplate. The difficult, present. The difficult and easy. Right? The constructs, your discrimination, and then let that go. Let that go. Let that go means pick it up. What? That means you take ownership. You take ownership. My preference, that's why I like that sound. I don't like this sound. Take ownership of that. If you take ownership, your responsibility, that's a process of exposing. Once you can expose, then you can work with it. Otherwise, if you always think culprits outside you, how are you going to change other people? If you don't change yourself, right? How are you going to help other people? You're not. You can only help other people when you yourself are free from vexations. When you yourself are at ease, free. Perceiver of freedom. And in the midst of the difficulty, criticism, blame, attacks, verbal attacks, abuse, what you hear is suffering of sentient beings. They're suffering. Don't take it personally. And you help all those who suffer. Perceiver of the sounds of the world. Sometimes people translate it as the cries of the world. Guan Yin's name, the cries, the sufferings of the world. And you'll be able to help. Then the sutra will have deeper meaning for us. Otherwise, it becomes like something very distant from us. Every line has methods of practice. Every line. This line, I only got to the first word, Avalokitesvara. There's a word before that, is when. When Avalokitesvara. When? Now. Now is when. Don't say, yeah, I'll do it later. When I practice that. Now. The when means now. Right? Okay? Any questions? Fred, we have a mic? Turn it on. Keep it on. Give it a second.
This is a short question. So I assume when we're listening, we should make an effort not to label sounds or things, but just listen to the sound without language.
That comes later.
Oh, so we can listen to it
in
with
daily
language?
life. In daily life, you want to be able to understand what other people are saying to you, right? Otherwise, if you drop that, labeling words like, I'm sorry, can you repeat it again? I was listening to ga 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 ga. I don't understand. So,
well, I'm assuming I could understand what they're saying without, discursiveness
is present.
them, like, this sounds crazy, or I really am hungry, or all the other things that come up when people say things.
Can you pass out the thing? Corey, can you pass it out? Okay. Yeah. So, yes, that's a method, but I teach that method, bracketing, words, language, label, comparison, in meditation retreats. In meditation retreats, where we can actually drop that. In daily life, we can't drop that. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. I find the teaching very helpful, and I have one question related to sounds that we currently do not like, right?
Good.
Comments and things like that. So if I catch myself in daily lives that I already started to have like aversion or other negative feelings about that sound, what are some encouragement or tools for us to stay present rather than going to the recursive thoughts or
Okay.
our habits?
First of all, you start practicing with sounds that are favorable, less contentious. Okay? But inevitably, in our daily life, we'll find ourselves, the sound just comes to us, someone criticizing or things happening. So what we need to do is relax and put most of our attention on the relaxing and grounding and just listening, open to where the sound is from, where the voicing is coming from. Yeah.
So is your attention going back to your body, or
Yeah,
is that
bodily, a
Okay.
somatic experience. Yeah,
That makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
okay. All right. Noah and then this gentleman. Yeah.
What's the relationship between this practice of Avalokitesvara and the direct contemplation of sound
Okay,
practice?
Move. Relationship between Avalokitesvara and contemplation of sound.
Direct contemplation, like when
Yeah.
we were doing like the practices earlier.
Direct contemplation we use during retreats. It's a kind of modified form of this. It's like a segment out of this complete. That method is called perfect penetration of ear faculty of sound. So direct contemplation that my teacher taught and I teach is a kind of excerpt out of that. Okay. Pass on. Don't turn it off. Yeah. This gentleman.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have two questions.
Okay.
I think I'll ask the more important one. So I really liked the idea of active but unaffected. That makes sense in the context of water, like moving, or birds chirping, or something, like a horn beeping. And I think I can understand like being active in it, but just like detaching myself. But whenever it comes to like words,
Human sounds.
yeah, when it comes to human sound, like we're talking about, and we are talking about like you have to be interpreting the words, right? Because otherwise it's like, oh, please repeat the question, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't understand how you could do that, but then be unaffected, if that makes sense. Like it makes sense to like, you know what I mean? Like have it present and not disregard it. But the second that you say, oh, the word word has meaning, you're affected. So I don't.
There are degrees of that. Yeah, I'm sure you have experience in your life when someone is maybe criticizing you or saying something and you're okay with it. You're just listening to it. It's kind of like that.
Okay, so it's like.
So you do understand, you perceive, but the important thing is you're practicing that yourself is not injected in that conversation. It's almost like, how when you can give great advice to a friend, having some problem, but when it happens to you, it's kind of, you need someone else to tell you the advice. It's kind of like that. Like when we are self-referencing, it's not so vested in the situation, which all of us have experienced. It's just someone else, your friend's problem, you should do this, It's kind of a little bit like that. So how does that happen? How can we practice that? Relax, ground. So learn to be somatically grounded. Then we're more in the present moment than in the kind of in the head space of memories in the past and the selfing. Yeah. When the presence of mindfulness and awareness, deep listening is present, it's less likely. Still can happen. We become affected, but we're aware of it. When we're not aware of this, then our automatic responses. We're affected, But there are degrees of that. Does that help? Okay. Your easier question?
Actually, I'm not sure it's easier. So we're talking about a sense when we're talking about hearing.
Yeah.
I guess the natural question is, what makes hearing special as opposed to any of the other senses in this very specific context?
Yeah, excellent question. Excellent question. Hearing is always present. Other senses are temporary. Even when you plug up your ears with earplugs, still present, right? So it's not like olfactory, taste. Right? Another one that comes close to it, but we're mostly disembodied, is tactile sensations. That's always present too. Right? Sight, all we need to do is close our eyes. Or you can even open your eyes and you're thinking of something and you don't know what you're looking at. So that's what special. So this becomes very important that we actually get a handle on how to integrate this into practice. That once we can do that, then the other senses, a little bit easier. Does that make sense? Yeah. So hearing is very important. Linda, last question.
My question's not a deep question. I just found when you talked early on about the meaning of Avalokitesvara,
Yeah.
I've never seen anything about that before, and I found it very interesting. And I think that you were talking about how that name was translated from one language to another. And I just wonder why I've never seen an English translation of that name the way you talked about it.
Some translators, the way we have that we will chant in a moment, we just use Avalokitesvara, right? So Romanized Sanskrit. But I've seen translations of Heart Sutra in which they just translate when Bodhisattva, perceiver of sound, was coursing in the deep Prajna. So sometimes people do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Last question.
When you were talking about the process when the person reaches samadhi, that the object disappear, that the sounds disappear and become one, the observer and the sound. And then it's not the sound itself, but it's like a frequency of the nature that is always present. I have no doubt of that, the existence of that frequency that has always been there. The hard part for me now is that I know it has been always there, and it's exactly that the reason that I cannot perceive it, because it's not something that changed. It's like something in the background. So what you're telling me is that the person that reached that state of deep concentration is able to detect that frequency. Is that right?
Yes. That's an easy question.
Amazing.
Okay, let's go to the chanting now.
It's amazing.
Asked by a physicist. All right, let's chant. Allow the sound to resonate through your body, grounded. Relax into it.
Mahaprajna Paramita Heart Sutra. When the Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara was coursing in the deep prajna paramita, he perceived that all five skandhas are empty, thereby transcending all sufferings. Riputra form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness not other than form. Form is precisely emptiness, and emptiness precisely form. Also are sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. Ariputra, this voidness of all dharmas is not born, not destroyed, not impure, not pure, does not increase or decrease. In voidness there is no form and no sensation, perception, volition, or consciousness. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought. There is no realm of the eye, all the way up to no realm of mental cognition. There is no, and there is no ending of ignorance through to no aging and death, and no ending of aging and death. There is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. There is no wisdom or any attainment with nothing to attain. Bodhisattvas relying on prajna paramita have no obstructions in their minds. Having no obstructions, there is no fear, and departing far from confusion and imagining, they reach ultimate nirvana. All past, present, and future Buddhas rely